Okay, so what we are doing is tapping the factory G01 M40i with HK speaker wires. So this is, the back corner is going to be a little bit of assumption here that you kind of know what you're doing, but I'm just going to show you the detail around how to get the wires out of here, tap into them, and then send that signal into the line out converter. I've got a audio control LC2i Pro that I'm going to send this to. You do need a fairly good quality line out because these do push out well over 25 volts, so your cheap stuff off Amazon is not going to cut it. Now this harness is the harness that comes out of the Harman booster. So it's usually plugged in here. It's pretty simple. There's lots of information on how to get this out. Basically this latch is usually pinned here. Just push it forward and the plug will come out, and then you're left with this loose connection. Now before we do any of this, obviously we're disconnecting the battery. I'm going to assume that you have a basic level of understanding of car electronics and you know how to disconnect a battery when you're working on a car. If you don't know how to do that, go watch a video on it, or perhaps pay somebody to do this for you. It's not difficult, but you just need to be careful with what you're doing. So what we need to do is, this plug is basically three pieces. It's the actual captured part and then two lines of plugs. So we need to remove these lines of plugs so that we can de-pin. And the way that you do that is just sort of pull out this flap here, and as you do that, just slide the block out, and then you will just be careful because some of these twisted pairs are a bit tight, so you don't want to break anything there. So now we've got this out and we can de-pin these wires here. These are pretty easy to de-pin. Just a sharp object or pointy object. I'm just going to use the ends of my multimeter connectors, but just be sure that you're confident in the order that these come out, because when you put them in, they need to go back in exactly the same place. So the way these are lined up in here, this is pin 1 here and this is our ground. Then we've got two pairs of speaker wires, each going to the front left and front right woofers. Now we're going to use the woofers because I'm adding a sub. I don't need a full range source here. I'm just looking for the low frequency. So in order to de-pin these, we're just going to press on a little tab here. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but there's just a little tab in there, and then as you press on that, you'll need to pull the wire. It's a bit fiddly. And then the wire will come out. So I'm just pressing on this little tab here, which is like a little locking tab, and we now have that wire out. And we're going to do that for all 5 of these wires here, so our ground and our 2 positive and negative speaker wires that run up to the woofers down the front under the driver and passenger seats. So again, we're just going to pop that tab in, and then can be a little bit finicky, so just take your time with these because you don't want to break these, they're a pain. Sometimes if you push down on the wire and then release the tab, it will come out a bit easier. And this one's being a pain. Let's try the next one. So what I did is I took a photo of this plug before I started disassembly, and I also videoed it and recorded myself talking about the order of the plugs, because we really don't want to get these wrong when you're putting them back in. The reason we're de-pinning these is because I want to cut the sheath off and tap into the wires properly. Not with wire taps or anything like that. It's a pretty poor connection. What I want to do is cut the sheath off and then solder the tap into each of these so that it's a really good connection, and then I can heat shrink it as well. Alright, so there are our 5 wires set free. We are going to take power from the wire on the other side, so this is our 12 volt constant, but we'll do that after we've done these 4. Alright, I'll go and get my soldering iron ready and get some heat shrink out and be back in a second. Okay, so we're back. I've stripped the sheathing off each of those 5 wires. I haven't done the power wire yet, so we're still working on this first plug, so ground and the 2 woofers, positive and negative on each. So what I've done, I've made these little pigtails. I have Deutsch connectors lying around, so I've just used Deutsch. You don't need to use that, you can just use a standard ISO plug, that's fine. So I've made this little pigtail up. I've just put some black heat shrink on the end so I remember which one I've called the ground, and then therefore which one is the positive. So they are twisted on. So what I've done is I've cut about 15 mil, so ye olde freedom units, just about half an inch, a little bit over half an inch. I've cut off the sheathing of each of the factory woofer wires. Just be careful with that. So I've just used a blade to trim around and then cut that wire off. You do not want to cut the wire, cut just the insulation. The ground one is super tough, so just be careful, take your time with it, get it right. Then what we have, and I'll show you the second one they're about to twist on. So this is my pigtail for the other woofer signal. About the same, so about 20 mil, so about 3/4 of an inch of wire exposed. That gives us plenty of wire to wrap around here and get a really good connection with the solder. So I've written down what each of these wires are. Just make sure you don't get them twisted up. It will make life a lot more difficult later. So keep them free. So what we have here is black with brown is our negative, and black with red is our positive for that. So my negative on this wire is the white one. I've got that black bit of heat shrink on it just to remind me. Now what you want to do is make sure that the wire is run in this direction. So this is all going to go back into this plug, and you want the pigtail to run this way. If you put it this way, you're going to have to bend your wire around, and it's going to put stress on the joint. So black with brown is my ground for this speaker, and my white with the black insulation. So I'm going to run it this way, just line up your wire here and then twist these 2 around each other. Now we are going to solder these joints as well, and then our positive for that speaker, same deal, line them up and twist around. Right, so now what you can see is we have the 2 pigtails, one for each of the speakers, one for each of the woofers. So this is the signal that's going to go to the line out converter. What I tend to do with these plugs is when I'm doing them in 2s, I'll have a male and a female, so that way when I go to plug in the other end, I don't get confused about which one goes in which, because we're going to wrap this up and you might not be able to see the colored wires. So if you just have opposite plugs on each part of the loom, you can't get it wrong. I'll show you that when I plug the other ends in. Alright, so we are good to solder now. I've had my soldering iron cooking in the background. I've got just a little jig to hold these wires for me, and I'll just go and grab that now. Okay, so I just printed a little 3D clamp to hold my wiring in for me. It's not working very well, but it's better than nothing. So the way we solder, we need to heat the wire up. Don't put globs of solder on your soldering iron. That's not how you solder properly. So the soldering iron goes on one side of the wire. Give it a second until it heats up the copper in your actual wire itself, and sort of allow the solder to flow through that heated wire. It'll take a sec. This is pretty thick wire. And this isn't a great soldering iron either, it's about 20 years old. So. Yeah, starting to flow now, I think. There we go. So you'll start to see it flow through the wire rather than just sort of pull up, and that's how you know you've got it hot enough, and you'll get a good connection out of this. I'm not sure whether this gripper is actually making it better or worse. There we go. Now we're getting a good flow there. So that's it. Obviously this is all hot, be very careful. Just sit it down on the ground behind you. Ask me how I know. Right, I'll just take this out and make sure that we've got a really good connection here. So that's flashed off and it's cooled down. So we've got good solder on all sides there. You can see that in the lights. Just be careful, this will be really hot. And that connection is solid. So the next one we're going to do is the positive side. Alright, there we go. All back together. So we've got our plug all back together. This is the 12 volt that we tapped, and then this side we've got our ground and then our 2 pairs of speaker wires. Just tester taped all that back up just with my pigtails poking out. So my ground, my 2 woofers and my power. So this is all going to the line out converter. The line out converter needs a 1 amp fuse in it to the audio control. I do have a quick disconnect on this, so that means the entire audio control can just be unplugged and come out of the car. So all of this means that you don't need to buy the plug and play harness. There's one available that I've been able to find, but I can't get it in Australia without paying a ridiculous amount of postage. So this would have cost me over $200 to be able to use the harness for this, whereas it's cost me maybe $10 worth of plugs and about an hour of my time, after doing a whole bunch of investigation trying to find out which wires are which, because there's not a whole lot of information. So hopefully this will provide that information from now on. So yeah, this is the intercept to supply speaker level inputs to an audio control line out converter. Everything after that process is pretty much normal for any car hooking up an aftermarket amp and sub, so I'm not going to go through any of that stuff. Power, ground, remote signal and RCAs are required, and you'll need those into your amp, and your amp goes out into your subwoofer. Plenty of videos on that, so we're not going into that one. Thanks guys, good luck.